Julius Caesar, The Fall of a Republic. Chapter 1, Prologue, The End of a Republic. The Republic is not what it used to be. The Senate is corrupt, the people restless, and the generals rule with swords instead of laws. And then came Caesar. Rome, once the beacon of order and republican ideal, was unraveling. By the 1st century BCE, it had grown far beyond the modest city-state it once was. It had become a vast empire in all but name, stretching from Spain to Syria, from Gaul to Greece, ruled not by emperors but by elected officials who no longer believed in the system they served. The Roman Republic was born out of a hatred for kings. For centuries, it proudly stood as a model of checks and balances, where no man could hold absolute power. The Senate debated, the magistrates executed, and the people voted. But beneath that structure, beneath the marble temples and orderly assemblies, greed, ambition, and fear festered. By the time Julius Caesar rose to prominence, Rome was a city in crisis. Political violence had become normal, bribery was rampant, wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few aristocrats, while the majority of Romans, the plebeians, lived in overcrowded slums, increasingly angry and easily manipulated. And the Senate? Once filled with wise men and civic leaders, it had become a battlefield for rival factions, each trying to outmaneuver the other with backroom deals and private armies. The optimates, defenders of the old aristocracy, clung to tradition. The populares, appealing to the common people, demanded reform. Between them, the republic teetered. Into this world stepped Gaius Julius Caesar, brilliant, charming, cunning, and utterly relentless. He wasn't the first Roman general to command an army, or even the first to march on Rome, but he would be the last to do so while claiming to fight for the Republic. Because once Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the world changed forever. His name would be remembered not just as a man, but as a force of history, feared by senators, adored by soldiers, and worshipped by the crowds. And by the time he was done, the Roman Republic would be gone, replaced by something new, something imperial, something eternal. But to understand how Rome fell, we must first understand the man who broke it, and why so many followed him willingly into the flames. This is the story of ambition, betrayal, civil war. This is the story of Julius Caesar and the fall of a republic. Chapter 2, Child of Rome. Julius Caesar was born on July 12th or 13th, 100 BCE, in a time when Rome was expanding rapidly, but so was its instability. His full name was Gaius Julius Caesar, and he came from an old and noble family, the Julii, who claimed descent from Venus, the goddess of love. But despite this proud lineage, Caesar's family was far from powerful. They were patricians, yes, the upper class, but they were poor by Roman aristocratic standards and politically sidelined. From a young age, Caesar was surrounded by danger. In 82 BCE, when he was just a teenager, a ruthless general named Lucius Cornelius Sulla seized control of Rome in a brutal civil war. Sulla became dictator and began executing his enemies through proscription, an official hit list. Caesar had the misfortune of being related by marriage to Gaius Marius, Sulla's sworn enemy. Caesar refused to divorce his wife Cornelia, the daughter of Marius's ally. That act of defiance could have cost him his life, but it didn't. It earned Sulla's reluctant respect. The dictator spared Caesar, reportedly saying, "There are many Mariuses in that young man." To escape the political storm, Caesar left Rome and joined the military. He fought in Asia Minor and won the civic crown, one of Rome's highest honors, for bravery in battle. He also proved he wasn't just a soldier, but a skilled negotiator and leader. After Sulla's death, Caesar returned to Rome, but not quietly. He began studying rhetoric, the art of public speaking, in Rhodes, the Greek island known for producing some of the best orators of the ancient world. And while traveling there, he was kidnapped by pirates. But this was no ordinary hostage situation. According to legend, when the pirates demanded a ransom, Caesar laughed. He told them they were asking too little, that he was worth more. While in captivity, he joked with his captors, wrote poetry, and promised that when he was freed, he'd return and crucify them. And he did. After his release and the payment of ransom, Caesar raised a fleet, hunted down the pirates, and had them all executed, just as he said he would. But in a display of Roman mercy, he had their throats cut first, to ease their suffering. This episode tells you everything about the man Caesar would become: confident, daring, ruthless, and aware of the power of reputation. When he returned to Rome for good, he was still relatively unknown, but that would change quickly. He began his political career as a prosecutor, taking on corrupt governors. He aligned himself with the populares, the political faction that championed the rights of the common people. He knew how to charm a crowd, he knew how to weaponize generosity, and he knew that to rise in Rome, you had to spend money, favors, and sometimes blood. The boy born into a sidelined family, nearly executed in his youth, was now preparing to climb the ladder of Roman politics, one risky move at a time. But ambition in the Republic was like kindling in a dry forest. It burned fast, and it often burned everything in its path. Chapter 3. Ambition Unleashed. In Rome, ambition was everything, and Caesar had it in abundance. But in a world full of rivals, assassins, and shifting alliances, rising to the top required more than charm and courage. It took strategy, and Caesar was a master strategist. By his early 30s, Caesar had already built a reputation as a bold public speaker and a man of the people. But to rise further, he needed titles, and more importantly, alliances. He began by securing one of the key political offices of the Republic, Pontifex Maximus, the High Priest of Rome. It was a deeply religious title, but make no mistake, Caesar wanted it for the power it gave, not the piety. He won the election through a mix of charisma, bribes, and backroom deals, defeating more senior candidates. He was only in his late 30s. Then came his climb through the cursus honorum, Rome's ladder of political offices. He served as praetor, then governor of a Spanish province, where he proved two things: he could govern and he could make money. While in Spain, Caesar led a short military campaign, defeated local tribes, and enriched both himself and his troops. But more than wealth, what Caesar gained was leverage. He paid off some of his debts and returned to Rome ready for the biggest prize yet, the consulship. But Caesar wasn't the only powerful man in Rome. Two others dominated the political scene. Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated general, loved by the people, but at odds with the Senate. Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who had both wealth and ambition, but lacked public support. Caesar saw an opportunity. He brought them together in a private alliance that would change Rome forever. Historians would later call it the First Triumvirate, a secret deal between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus to divide power between themselves and bypass the Senate. With their backing, Caesar was elected consul in 59 BCE, the highest office in Rome. During his consulship, he pushed through controversial land reforms that favored Pompey's veterans and the poor. The Senate resisted. Caesar ignored them. He passed laws through the assemblies, bypassing tradition and causing outrage among the aristocrats. Many saw him not as a leader, but as a threat to the Republic itself. But Caesar didn't care. He was just getting started. At the end of his consulship, instead of fading into retirement like a good Republican citizen, Caesar secured a proconsular command, governorship over the provinces of Gaul and Illyricum, and with that command came legions, power, and war. But before leaving for Gaul, Caesar made one final move to cement his connection with Pompey. He gave him his daughter, Julia, in marriage. It wasn't just a family bond, it was a political one. Now Caesar had a strong army, powerful allies, and the freedom to act outside of Rome. He was no longer just a politician. He was becoming a warlord. Over the next decade, Caesar would launch one of the most ambitious military campaigns in Roman history. He would conquer lands far beyond Rome's borders, and he would write it all down himself, carefully crafting his legend for the people of Rome. He would become both hero and threat, and the Senate, watching from afar, would grow ever more uneasy. What began as ambition was turning into something else, something dangerous. Chapter 4. conqueror of Gaul. In 58 BCE, Julius Caesar left Rome behind and marched into Gaul, the vast tribal territory that stretched across what is now France, Belgium, parts of Switzerland, and beyond. Officially, he was sent to protect Roman interests and secure the borders. But in truth, Caesar was after something far more valuable than safety: glory. In the Roman world, military success was the fastest route to power, and Caesar understood that if he could conquer Gaul, a land filled with fierce tribes and rich resources, he could return to Rome not just as a politician, but as a legend. What followed was a military campaign unlike anything Rome had seen before. Caesar faced dozens of tribes, each with their own languages, customs, and warriors. Many were fierce fighters, and some outnumbered Caesar's forces by the tens of thousands. But Caesar had what they did not: discipline, tactics, and Roman engineering. He wrote about the campaigns himself in Commentarii de Bello Gallico, the commentaries on the Gallic War. It was part military report, part political propaganda. In it, Caesar always came out as the brilliant commander, the civilizer, the man bringing order to the wild north. But behind the words was brutal reality. Entire villages were wiped out. Cities were besieged and starved. Rebellions were crushed with ruthless efficiency. One by one, the Gallic tribes fell, until only one remained. His name was Vercingetorix. A charismatic and intelligent chieftain, Vercingetorix united the Gallic tribes against Caesar in 52 BCE, a final, desperate resistance. It all came down to a siege at Alesia, a fortified city on a hilltop. The Gauls held the high ground, but Caesar encircled the city with a massive wall, then built another wall outside that, to defend against any reinforcements. His men were caught between two enemy forces, inside and outside the city, but they held. The siege lasted weeks. Food ran out. And finally, Vercingetorix surrendered, throwing down his weapons at Caesar's feet. It was Caesar's greatest victory, and Gaul was now Roman. Over the course of 8 years, Caesar had killed or enslaved over 1 million people, reshaped the map of Western Europe, and secured unimaginable wealth for himself and his army. But perhaps his most important gain was loyalty. His legions weren't just soldiers, they were loyal followers devoted to Caesar personally. He paid them, he led from the front, and he shared in their hardships. They would march with him anywhere, even against Rome. And that was exactly what he was beginning to consider, because back in Rome, tensions were rising. The first triumvirate was collapsing. Crassus had died in a failed campaign in the east. Pompey had aligned himself with the Senate. And the Senate, fearful of Caesar's growing power, ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar refused. To return without his army meant certain political death, perhaps even assassination. He knew the Senate feared him. And so, on a cold January morning in 49 BCE, Caesar made a decision that would change the course of history. He led his army across the Rubicon River, the boundary of his province, and marched toward Rome. It was treason, it was war, and it was only the beginning. Chapter 5: The Rubicon Moment. It was the night of January 14th, 10th, 49 BCE, and Julius Caesar stood at the banks of the Rubicon River, the northern border of Italy, the line no Roman general was permitted to cross with an army. To do so was to declare war on the Republic itself. Behind him stood Legio 13, battle-hardened veterans who had followed him through Gaul. Ahead lay Rome, rich, proud, and guarded by men who once called him ally, now enemies. Caesar knew exactly what he was doing. He paused, legend says, before crossing the water and uttered the famous words, Alei acta est. The die is cast. With that, he led his troops across the Rubicon and declared civil war. News spread like wildfire. In Rome, panic erupted. The Senate was stunned. Many had underestimated Caesar, thinking he would obey tradition and surrender power. But Caesar had outmaneuvered them. He marched swiftly and methodically, facing little resistance as town after town opened its gates. Pompey the Great, once Caesar's closest ally, had become the Senate's champion. But he was caught unprepared. Lacking enough forces in Italy, Pompey and the Senate's loyalists fled Rome, retreating to Greece, where they could raise an army. And so, for the first time in centuries, Rome was without a functioning Senate, without a clear ruler, and firmly in the hands of a single man, Julius Caesar. But Caesar didn't declare himself dictator, not yet. Instead, he presented himself as the savior of the Republic, claiming he only wanted justice and peace. He even tried to negotiate with Pompey. But Pompey refused. The battle lines were drawn. Caesar moved quickly. He secured Spain first, defeating Pompey's forces there without even a major battle, calling it his bloodless campaign. Then he turned east across the Adriatic to face Pompey's army directly. In 48 BCE, the two sides met at Pharsalus in northern Greece. Pompey had the larger army, nearly 50,000 men to Caesar's fewer than 25,000, and he had the advantage of position. But Caesar had experience, discipline, and above all, loyalty. His troops would follow him into hell. The battle was brutal and fast. Caesar lured Pompey into attacking, then launched a surprise flanking maneuver. His reserves, hidden behind his lines, crushed Pompey's cavalry and sent the right wing into chaos. Within hours, Pompey's army was broken. It was a stunning, total victory. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping to find refuge with the boy king Ptolemy XIII. But Caesar had already become too powerful, too feared. Seeking to win Caesar's favor, Ptolemy had Pompey murdered on the beach, his head cut off and presented to Caesar as a gift. But Caesar did not smile. He reportedly turned away in horror at the sight of Pompey's severed head, his former son-in-law, his rival, and once his friend. The Republic's last true guardian had died not on the battlefield, but as a refugee, betrayed and alone. And now, there was no one left to stop Caesar. He remained in Egypt for several months, and it was here that he met Cleopatra, the exiled queen vying for the throne. Caesar backed her claim, and together they defeated her brother's forces. Cleopatra was restored to power, and Caesar stayed long enough to see their son, Caesarion, born. Then he returned to Rome. The Civil War wasn't over yet. Resistance flared in North Africa and in Spain. But one by one, Caesar crushed every pocket of rebellion. His final great battle was at Munda, in Spain, where he defeated the last of Pompey's sons. By 45 BCE, Julius Caesar stood alone. He had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, defeated the Senate's army, and pursued his enemies to the ends of the earth. He was, in all but name, king of Rome. But the Republic still clung to its illusions, and Caesar was about to test just how much power a single man could hold before the old order struck back. Chapter 6. Rome in Civil War. By 45 BCE, the Civil War was over. Pompey was dead. The Senate's armies were defeated. The Republic, though still standing in name, had no power left to resist, and at the center of it all stood Julius Caesar, a man who had not only defied the Senate, but broken the rules of the Republic, rewritten military history, and returned to Rome as a living legend. But Caesar didn't declare himself emperor, not yet. Instead, he moved carefully, strategically. He accepted the title of Dictator, an emergency position in the Roman constitution. Normally, a dictator served for 6 months during a time of crisis. But Caesar's dictatorship was different. First, it was extended to 10 years, then to life. This wasn't a temporary solution. This was a permanent change to Roman power. He filled the Senate with his allies, loyalists, many of them former soldiers or provincial elites. The chamber grew to over 900 members, diluting its authority and turning it into a ceremonial body. Debate faded. Decrees were passed at Caesar's will. He held multiple titles at once: consul, tribune, pontifex maximus, and dictator for life. and while he publicly rejected the title of king, everyone knew what he truly was. But Caesar didn't just centralize power, he used it. He launched a wave of reforms. He reduced debt, restructured the grain distribution, expanded citizenship to distant provinces, created the Julian calendar that we still use today, and even planned ambitious infrastructure projects like draining marshes and rebuilding Rome's skyline. He settled thousands of veterans in new colonies across the empire, spreading Roman influence far beyond Italy. To the poor, he was a hero. To the provinces, he was a liberator. But to the old aristocracy, he was something else. A tyrant. They whispered it in private. They remembered the tales of Tarquin, Rome's last king, overthrown centuries ago. They told themselves that Caesar was different in name only. And then came the public displays. Statues of Caesar were erected beside the gods. His face appeared on coins, something no living Roman had ever done. A golden throne was placed in the Senate. Priests and flattery surrounded him. A crown was even presented to him by Mark Antony during a festival, which Caesar famously refused. But was it all for show, or was it a test? Some believed Caesar was waiting for the right moment to declare himself king. Others believed he already had. And while Caesar's supporters cheered, a growing group of senators grew fearful. They began to ask a dangerous question: was the Republic already dead? And if so, who would have the courage to act? Because Caesar was no longer just a man, he was a symbol of power, of dominance, of the collapse of everything the Republic once stood for. And the only thing more dangerous than a tyrant is a beloved one. Chapter 7. Dictator for Life. The year is 44 BCE, and Julius Caesar now stands at the height of his power. He has conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, crushed rebellion in Spain and Africa, and filled the Senate with men who owe him everything. The people love him, the army worships him, and the Senate fears him. Caesar is no longer just a Roman leader, he is Rome. He has been appointed Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. His likeness is engraved on coins, his birthday is declared a public holiday, a temple is built in his honor. He wears the purple robe of royalty, sits on a golden throne, and signs his name as the unconquerable God. And yet, Caesar still insists, "I am not king." But the Republic's defenders know otherwise. The traditions are dead, the checks and balances are broken, the Senate is reduced to a rubber stamp. Rome, the Republic, is now a one-man state. And some men in the Senate have had enough. Among them are conservatives who still believe in the old Roman virtues, like Marcus Junius Brutus, descended from the man who helped overthrow Rome's last king centuries before. Others include Gaius Cassius, a hardened soldier, and Decimus, one of Caesar's own trusted lieutenants. Together, they begin to form a conspiracy. They believe they are not committing murder, they are preserving liberty. They see Caesar not as a leader, but a tyrant, and they convince themselves that without him, the Republic can still be saved. But they know one thing for sure. Caesar must be stopped before he leaves Rome again, because Caesar has plans, big ones. He is preparing for a grand campaign, a massive invasion of Parthia, the empire that had humiliated Rome years earlier by killing Crassus. Caesar wants revenge, glory, a new conquest. It would be the final piece of his legend. But before he can march east, he must attend to matters at home. And so, on the morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar wakes in his home in Rome. It is the Ides of March. A soothsayer has warned him to be careful on this day. His wife, Calpurnia, dreams of his death and begs him not to go to the Senate. But Caesar is not afraid. He is Caesar. He enters the theater of Pompey where the Senate is meeting. He is handed a petition. As he reads it, the senators surround him. Then, one of them pulls a dagger. The first strike lands on his shoulder. Caesar turns and sees the face of Brutus. Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus? 23 times the blades fall. Blood soaks his robe. Caesar collapses at the base of the statue of Pompey, the very man he had defeated. The irony is brutal. The man who brought down the Republic's enemies is slain by its defenders. In the minds of the conspirators, they have saved Rome. They expect the people to cheer, the Republic to rise again. But they are wrong. Very wrong. Chapter 8. The Ides of March. March 15th, 44 BCE. The Ides of March. Julius Caesar, dictator of Rome, lies dead on the floor of the Senate. Blood pools beneath his toga. 23 stab wounds mark his body. The blade that took his life may have been wielded by many hands, but each thrust was meant to kill not just the man, but the power he represented. The conspirators step back, soaked in blood, expecting applause. But there is only silence. Their plan had been swift, their timing perfect, their reasoning, in their eyes, noble. Yet the Rome they believed they were saving no longer existed. As word of Caesar's death spreads through the city, fear takes hold. The people do not rise in joy, they flee in terror. Shops close, doors are barred, the city holds its breath, and then the backlash begins. The Senate, far from being restored to honor, is thrown into chaos. The conspirators, Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, and others, expected to be hailed as liberators, but instead they find themselves isolated, uncertain, and increasingly despised. Because Caesar, in death, has become more powerful than ever. His allies, especially Mark Antony, act swiftly. Antony, Caesar's co-consul and longtime supporter, delivers what may be the most consequential speech in Roman history, a eulogy that turns the tide of public opinion. He speaks to the crowd in the forum, beside Caesar's bloodied toga, and reads aloud Caesar's will. Caesar left a portion of his fortune to the Roman people. He left his private gardens for public use. He called the Roman people his heirs. The crowd is stunned. This was no tyrant. This was their champion. Anger ignites like a spark in dry leaves, and then Antony lifts the blood-stained garment Caesar wore when he was murdered. The crowd erupts. They tear down benches, set fires, and march through the streets. Riots explode across the city. Effigies of Brutus and Cassius are burned. Some demand revenge. Others demand Antony take Caesar's place. The conspirators, they flee. Brutus and Cassius escape to the east, where they begin to raise armies of their own, preparing for another war. They tell themselves they are saving the Republic, again. But fewer and fewer believe them. Because Caesar's death did not restore the Republic, it broke it beyond repair. In its place emerged a power vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped 3 men. Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted general, Lepidus, a seasoned politician, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, just 18 years old. Together, they formed the Second Triumvirate, a brutal alliance forged in blood and vengeance. Their first order of business? A list of enemies. A prescription. Just like Sulla a generation earlier, they wrote down the names of those who stood against them. Senators, nobles, even former allies, marked for death. Heads were displayed in the forum. Fortunes were seized. Rome bled again, and all of it in Caesar's name. His murder had not saved the Republic. It had triggered its final transformation, from a state of laws to a battleground of warlords. And as Rome braced for yet another civil war, the world waited to see who would emerge from the ashes of Caesar's death to inherit his legacy. Chapter 9. After Caesar, Rome's final war. Julius Caesar was dead, but his shadow stretched long over the republic he had shattered. The streets of Rome still echoed with the cries of revenge. And out of the chaos rose 3 men who would carve up the Roman world among themselves. The Second Triumvirate. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend and powerful general. Lepidus, a seasoned statesman and military commander, and Octavian, Caesar's teenage heir, adopted posthumously as his son. Together, they ruled with absolute authority. The Senate was powerless. The Republic, already dying, was now merely a mask worn by military strongmen. Their first act was vengeance. The triumvirate launched a brutal purge. Lists of enemies of the state were posted, names of senators, nobles, and political rivals. These were proscriptions, and they came with a death sentence. Properties were seized. Families were ruined. And one of the most shocking victims was the great orator, Cicero, who had opposed Antony. He was hunted down, murdered, and his head and hands nailed to the speaker's podium in the Forum. Blood washed the streets of Rome, not in Caesar's name alone, but in the name of his legacy. But the triumvirate was not built to last. Their fragile alliance was always one of convenience, not trust. And while Lepidus faded into irrelevance, Antony and Octavian were on a collision course from the very beginning. First, they turned east. Their armies marched toward Philippi in Macedonia, where Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of Caesar's assassination, had rallied the last defenders of the Republic. Two massive battles followed in 42 BCE. Brutus and Cassius fought valiantly, but in the end, they were defeated. Cassius died by suicide. Brutus followed soon after. The Republicans were dead. And now, Rome belonged to Caesar's heirs. But the unity was over. The triumvirate fractured. Antony claimed the East, rich, ancient, and full of influence. Octavian ruled the West, Rome, Italy, and its heartland. And in the East, Antony met Cleopatra again. The Queen of Egypt, once Caesar's lover, now became Antony's. Their alliance was personal, political, and, in the eyes of many Romans, dangerous. They had children, they ruled like monarchs, and Antony began to behave less like a Roman consul and more like an Eastern king. He even promised territory, Roman land, to Cleopatra's heirs. Back in Rome, Octavian seized the moment. He launched a propaganda war, claiming Antony had gone native, that he had betrayed Rome for the love of a foreign queen. He published Antony's will, which shockingly named Cleopatra and her children as primary beneficiaries. Rome erupted. In 32 BCE, the Senate declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. It was a clever move. The war wasn't framed as a civil conflict, but as a national defense against a foreign queen. The final showdown came at Actium in 31 BCE, a massive naval battle off the coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet, led by his brilliant general Agrippa, trapped and outmaneuvered Antony and Cleopatra. Surrounded, they fled, their ships burning behind them. 1 year later, Octavian marched into Egypt. Antony and Cleopatra, knowing all was lost, took their own lives. Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra followed, legend says by poisoned asp. Octavian, now the sole ruler of Rome, had done what Caesar could not. He ended the civil wars. He ended the Republic. And he did it without declaring himself king. In 27 BCE, Octavian took the title Augustus, the revered one. The Republic was gone, the Empire had begun, and though Augustus ruled, it was still Caesar's ghost that haunted every marble column of Rome, the man whose ambition had triggered the fall, whose death had sparked a revolution, and whose name would live on in the very word for emperor, Caesar. Chapter 10. Legacy of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar died over 2,000 years ago, but his name and his legacy are eternal. He was a man who defied tradition, shattered the old political order, and changed the course of Western history. In his lifetime, he was a general, a politician, a reformer, and a dictator. In death, he became a myth. His impact is impossible to measure, because it's woven into the very structure of the world we live in. Politics. He destroyed the Roman Republic, but perhaps it was already doomed. Corruption, inequality, and violence had hollowed it from the inside. Caesar didn't invent dictatorship. He exposed the fragility of democracy when placed in the hands of ambitious men. He proved that charisma, military success, and mass appeal could outmatch tradition and law. And every tyrant since has studied his rise. Law and reform. Despite his ruthless ambition, Caesar implemented real reforms. He eased debts, curbed corruption, expanded citizenship, and laid the foundation for the Julian calendar, a version of which the world still uses today. His actions modernized Rome, but also centralized it under one man. He created efficiency, but at the cost of freedom. Empire. His death triggered a chain reaction that ended with the birth of the Roman Empire. His heir, Augustus, became the first emperor, and every emperor after took the name Caesar as a title, even outside Rome. The German word Kaiser, the Russian word Tsar, all trace back to Caesar. He became more than a man, he became a concept, the idea of absolute rule, cloaked in glory. Legacy in history and culture. For centuries, Caesar has been a subject of fascination. Historians, philosophers, generals, and writers have all wrestled with who he really was. Was he a hero who ended chaos and rebuilt Rome, or a tyrant who placed himself above the law and destroyed liberty? Shakespeare portrayed him as powerful, proud, and fated to die. Modern historians portray him as both revolutionary and dangerous, a man who challenged a broken system but replaced it with a crown. His life is a mirror, reflecting the hopes and fears of every age. Because Caesar's story isn't just about Rome, it's about the tension between democracy and dictatorship, about the cost of ambition, the danger of populism, and the fragility of freedom. He was not the first man to rise too far too fast, and he will not be the last. So, was Julius Caesar a hero or a villain? Perhaps, like Rome itself, he was both. One thing is certain, he changed the world, and his name will never be forgotten.